Hello, and welcome to the Prime Time podcast hosted by myself, Primus. This is the inaugural episode, and today I'm going to be talking about a topic near and dear to my heart, and that is visual language. Now, what is visual language? I mean, obviously, when you think about it, it's a language that is visual. So, what does that really mean? To me, that means conveying your ideas and your concept through pictures or videos or even sculptures or MOCs. And because of that, I feel like this ties very strongly into Bionicle and CCBS building. But like any language, a visual language has its own structure. And for Bionicle and CCBS building, I think that structure consists of textures, colorization, proportion, and shaping. I feel like those are the four core tenets of Bionicle, CCBS, Technic, system, whatever you want to call it, Lego building. And as such, I think that those are important things to think of conceptually when you start building a Bionicle CCBS MOC. And more at a high level. It's not like something that you see at every little inch of the MOC. It's more of an overarching interaction of the parts in the MOC. So, it's not also something that I think that everybody really sticks to, especially when you're starting out, when you're building. At first you're just trying to see what you can do with the parts that you have, and at the end of the day, sometimes you just want to build a Toa, and he's gonna have flame swords, and it's pretty straightforward. I think it's when you get to more abstract concepts, maybe not abstract, more concepts that are more out there and non-traditionally Bionicle, that you really need to hone in on utilizing those four tenets, color, shape, proportion, and texture. As such, I've got 4 MOCs that I want to talk about today, 3 from other builders and then 1 of my own, that each touch on one of those core tenets of the Bionicle CCBS building visual language. And the first MOC that I have to talk about today is Hector by Jafa. Now, I would think this is a relatively well-known MOC. Jafa's a pretty popular builder, and this is one of his more well-received recent builds. And for good reason, obviously. This is a very well-built MOC, and it's one of my favorites of Jafa's recent body of work, where he's really focused in on the shaping of his builds and his overall parts usage. But really what I want to focus in on is the shaping of the MOC. Jafa manages to utilize the Mari tubes and the chain pieces to really show that the coat draws in at the center. And that's not something you typically see on a generic Bionicle humanoid. And I think that's what really has made Jafa's stuff to really start standing out above the rest of the community, is that he's been putting this extra emphasis on shaping in his MOCs. Like, Hector's shoulders flare out and he has a very dramatic pose. And it's the shapes that he achieves through the build that really add to the character of the MOC. And also, like, the shape in his peg, like how it tapers down, but also, like, moves up through the thigh. There's just a lot of nice little details that Jafa has managed to achieve in this MOC through the use of creative shaping and creative parts usage. And because of this focus on shaping, you really do feel like Hector is wearing a lab coat and he is some sort of mad scientist. And that helps convey Jafa's idea and the concept of Hector better to his audience. In his previous iterations of Hector, he didn't really have that mad scientist vibe to him, even though, Jaffa had said in his description that he was a scientist. So I think by focusing on the visual aspect of conveying that idea, he's been better able to showcase the character of Hector. And, I think that's a very important distinction. You should be able to, visually show what your mock is supposed to be as opposed to just simply describing it. And that's a big step to take as a builder, like I can make a mock and I can say that it is a fire monster or something, but if there isn't anything red on it, or if there isn't anything that really conveys that feeling or imagery of fire, how is somebody supposed to know that? So, going back to Hector, that's a really big thing that Jaffa has managed to accomplish in this mock, is that he has, he's really nailed the lab coat shape and vibe of the character visually. And that really helps him convey that image through shaping. So, that's just one example of shaping. I could probably spend the entire podcast talking about just shaping, but I would like to kind of hit on all of the ideas and not just Jaffa's mock, obviously. So, with that being said, I'd like to move on to a relatively new mock from Jack the Mad called The Monk. And what I'd really like to focus in on in this mock is the textures. Now, in the mock, it's kind of really divided into two halves. The upper half, which has very smooth textures, and the majority of the lower half has these very detailed textures, which convey the robotic enhancements that the monk has gone under. And it's this really difference in texture that conveys the difference between the human portion of the build and the non-human portion of the build. And, with that added detail, it adds another level to the mock. If he had just had large CCBS arms, he would probably just been a normal humanoid monk with this flowing cloak that he has on. But because he has these very thin, gray, greebly arms and legs, you can tell that the monk has undergone a change. Like, he's not just a regular humanoid anymore. So by doing this, Jack has kind of elevated the concept of his mock from just a regular monk to now a robot monk who's floating in the air. And it's really through the use of texture and color that he does this. It's because he could have had thin arms that were tan and smooth, and he would just been a regular humanoid. But now he has these thin arms that are gray and are very detailed, that you can tell that it's supposed to be mechanical and not just robotic. And by focusing on textures like that, and repeating the textures too, he makes sure to repeat the lightsaber parts in the arms and in the legs, that he kind of creates a cohesive whole for the mock. And probably I'm looking into that a little bit too deep, but it's a nice thing to see when you see a build, that the builder has put in that level of thought into the mock. So I really do think that is a good example of utilizing textures to tell your idea and to convey the message. Like, for instance, Jack's mock has no description. It just is the monk. But you can draw that it is a monk that has made significant changes to himself because of all of the robotic elements in the mock. Also, by using these textures, Jack has been able to create obvious shapes in the mock that represent the monk's robes. And, this ties back into what Jaffa was able to do with Hector's coat, is that by focusing on large, solid areas, you're able to create clothing, basically, for your humanoids. And it's a very cool thing that I've been seeing anyways, and it seems like a more recent trend to be giving brick-built clothes to your creation. So with that being said, I kind of want to segue into my next topic of colors. And I think that a very good, also recent mock to showcase this is Vodos by VB, Vampire Borak. Now, it's a predominantly black mock, but it has these huge splashes of color in the center that really draw your eye there. He's got these dark purple textured ribbed tubes running all over the place in the torso, as well as these bright pink pots and tubes running into the upper torso, and he's got blue pneumatic tubes running all. Just a lot of tubes in general, but a very localized splash of color. And he also has yellow and blue splashed throughout the mock, which emulate pistons and very strong mechanical joints. So even though the color scheme is relatively muted, I mean it is mostly black, VB manages to take these very bright colors and draw the viewer's eyes right to the center of the mock, where the majority of the build is. And I think by drawing the viewer's eyes to the center, he also gets to show off the techniques that he used in the shoulders and in the head and throughout the rest of the body. And then the yellow splashes draw your eyes to the ray gun arm and down to the legs. So he uses the colors in the mock to draw the viewer's eyes throughout the whole build. And as such, you really get a feel for how alien the mock is, right? It has these very irregular colors in the center of the torso that look like exposed, intestines and guts. Like, it looks like his guts are exposed to the viewer. And that's pretty freaky, right? Like, it is, not only is it imposing because of its size, but because of this mass in the center, you're wondering what is going on with this, giant alien life form. And I think that's something that you don't really see very often is, I mean, obviously you see aliens and robots being tackled in Bionicle. That seems to be the bread and butter is, those are easier things to create given the type of parts that Bionicle uses. I mean, it's supposed to be something biomechanical. But I just don't feel like you see mocks like this, where it's this titanic being, but also has this, what looks like an exposed vulnerability right in its center. It looks like it could be a boss character, and that's its weak point. And I don't know, it just seems like that's something that I don't see very often. Maybe I need to be looking in more places to see that. But I just don't think that that's something that gets captured, that you build could be, something put into a video game, not something taken out of a video game. I do think it's pretty common that people try to build something from a video game, but I don't know if it's as often that people create something that they could actually visualize going into a video game. To me, this is a character, like a very good concept of a boss character for a video game where you have to fight this guy. And man, I would not want to have to fight this guy if I wasn't well equipped. Obviously, he looks very imposing, and I've definitely gotten off topic, but it's a very powerful mock in my opinion. It's very powerful, well built. The colors are well, and that's what's kind of driven me away from what I was originally getting at, was the coloration. But it isn't, to me, like, coloration doesn't involve just having a lot of colors in your build. Like, obviously this mock does have a lot of colors in his build, but it's the concentration of colors. Like, he uses deep purple only in the torso and only in the lower torso, and he uses the hot pink only in the center of the torso, and then working its way up to the neck area. And the blue is only for those tubes and as little accents on the gun and the supports at the bottom, as well as the light gray to be more like the greebles and the details of the construction of the mech, as well as acting as rivets and bindings. And you have dark gray that acts as the connectors of the hoses, and it's just all very thought out. And instead of having his colors like randomly placed, like obviously he said, I want to have an alien, I want it to be pink. He could have placed pink throughout the whole mock if he wanted to, but by centralizing it, he really shows that this is the only part of the actual creation that is exposed. Everything else is underneath this heavy black armor and this giant black ray gun. And I think that adds a really cool element to the mock that you would miss out on if the colors weren't so concentrated into the center and then, lightly distributed throughout the rest of the mock. And I could probably go on all day about VB's Vodos. I got to actually see it in person about a month ago, and it is just an astounding build. So I don't know what else to say other than I'm just going to move on to the next mock that I want to talk about, which is my own mock, Ibrahim, whose proportions are what set him apart, at least in my eyes. Like, talking about my own mock, of course, I know what I was anticipating as I built him. And once I kind of, reached the final version of the mock, I knew what I wanted to convey. But it's the use of a very squat body in combination with very large legs makes him seem not like a human, even though he is bipedal, he's not really humanoid. He kind of evokes more of like a Portal 2 robot like Atlas, and that's what I was intending for him, is that he doesn't really look like a human, and he's very definitely robotic. So by exaggerating the proportions, I'm able to achieve that. He's got legs that would be obviously way too long on a traditional humanoid, and his torso is very, very stout. Like, it's only a handful of studs high total, and his head is placed at a weird spot on the torso. It's not like he's at the top of the torso, but it's actually closer to the center. And I managed to make it that his shoulders are about as wide as his hips, but his hips are very, very wide. And then, to contrast that, he's got these very long, thin legs and feet. And by doing that, I intend to convey a build that is, very definitely robotic. And I feel like that adds a bit of character to him. Like, it's not like he's just a regular robot. He's this very oddly built robot. And because of that, I want that to stand out to the viewer, right? I want to impress upon them that this is not a regular human. It is a robotic being that is purpose-built for something, and he has to have this squat body with this high center of gravity for a specific purpose. And it's because of that specific intended purpose that other parts of the mock developed, right? Like, as I built him, once I decided that he was going to be squat but have very long legs, that's when I started saying, all right, well, how is he going to support himself? That he's going to need this staff, and then when he has this staff, who uses staffs? Shepherds do. Shepherds have cloaks, and that's when I started to add details to him. So as kind of as part of my build process, as the mock developed after I had an initial idea set. And I think that's a way that using these structures in visual language can actually help you during the build process. Like, I decided that I wanted to focus on proportion immediately. I didn't have a set idea on what I was going to build, but once I started putting the pieces together, I came up with this proportion scheme, and then that gave me the rest of the structure for the mock. Like, I knew what I wanted to do after I had that idea set. And that's just one of the ways that I think that you can use these language structures, visual language structures, is that, during the start of the mock, you can say, I want a mock that, like, you can plan out the colors. You can say that I want a giant black robot, but he has these pink and purple tubes coming out of him to represent that he's an alien. Or I have this mad scientist, and I need to give him a cloak or a lab coat. And, you determine the shapes that you want to achieve, and then by doing so figure out the parts that you need to use in your build. Or you say, all right, I need to convey that something is robotic, so you focus on having a high amount of texture to contrast against, very smooth surfaces that could be clothing or armor. And then you focus on the proportions of it. Do you want it to be humanoid? Do you want it to be animalistic? Do you want it to be bipedal but not really humanoid, or animalistic but have two legs, or something of a mix of both. Like you decide, all right, I'm going to tweak it, and he's going to have very long, lanky arms and very stubby legs, or vice versa. It's taking these elements of the visual language that is CCBS building and kind of tweaking them and playing with them that we all really do. Like even if you're building a regular run-of-the-mill Toa, like you've decided that you're going to take Vakama and you're going to modify him slightly, right? Like you're still using that visual language. You want to show that you've given him a cool new weapon, right? Well, now how does that weapon look, right? You have to think about that. Even when you're starting out, you kind of think of these things inherently. I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail of my thoughts on the process, and I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you haven't, let me know. If you have, let me know. Leave me a comment down below, I guess, and we'll see if I end up doing any more of these. I hope you enjoyed it. Gotta tell you, the hardest part of this whole thing was talking about my own build, because obviously I know what I'm trying to convey with my own visual language. I don't really want to talk about my mock because I don't want to ruin the interpretation that other people come up with. So, yeah, that is the first episode of Primetime Podcast.